I'm going to share with you some of our thoughts in the Shell scenario team of how the unprecedented geopolitical and energy shocks are affecting the energy system and how they reshape the transition trajectory that we embark on. And of course, Shell is a private company, so I have to start with a legal disclaimer. But the first thing to keep in mind is what I'm doing with my team in the Shell scenario team, and this is a half-century-old team with a time-honored tradition of trying to reflect on possible futures. And I'm emphasizing the plural, because if you are interested in the future, only God knows the answer. So what we are trying to do is to reflect on the critical uncertainties and help decision-makers navigating them. And just before the war in Ukraine started, we asked the question how the world economy could recover from the coronavirus shock. What is the big story? Are we going to see a science fiction movie, or maybe a romantic comedy, or perhaps a thriller? And there we designed 3 storylines, and then we run the energy system models to analyze the energy and climate implications of those. And not in the order of importance, but I just have to start somewhere. We designed a pathway, we designed a scenario, we called it waves, where the big story is consumption. It is a world where people fed up by the coronavirus restrictions, they want to go out, spend money, enjoy life. And essentially it is a consumption which drives the energy system. We also designed a pathway, we called it islands, which looks at how nation-state governments implemented restrictions which were unprecedented in peacetime, how they intervened to keep the economy open, how they became more nationalistic and more inward-looking, keeping vaccines at home, keeping medical equipment at home. And we designed a pathway where the key driver is security. It's a more inward-looking, more deglobalizing world. And we also designed a pathway which recognizes that even though the coronavirus is only weakly related to climate change, we also observed that the coronavirus period was associated with a sudden intensification of the social and political concerns about climate change, both top-down by governments and also bottom-up by social movements. And this actually makes perfect sense at a philosophical level, because the coronavirus was a very timely reminder that our modern society is not resilient to natural hazards. It was not resilient to a new virus, and it's almost certainly not resilient to a climate shock. Now, on the 22nd of February, just before the war, I would have told you that we are dominantly in the wave scenario. The recovery from the coronavirus was very energy intensive, a massive scale consumption wave. Consumption shifted from services to manufactured goods. You know, your favorite yoga club is still closed down, so you spend your money ordering a new gadget online. That gadget has to be manufactured more often than not in Asia, and then the gadget has to be transported to the consumers. All of this drove global energy consumption up. And this is the reason why in the wave scenario, climate policy fails. Energy consumption in this scenario is just too high. Yeah. Then came the 23rd of February, and the world plunged into the islands scenario. Geopolitics and security became very high on the agenda. Now, it's important to reflect on that in the island scenario, climate policy also fails, but for a different reason. The most important reason for the failure is the role of domestic coal. If you take Chinese coal, which is mined and burned in China, or South African coal mined and burned in South Africa, or Polish coal mined and burned in Poland. So basically coal which never crosses an international border, that's around 30% of global carbon dioxide emissions. This 30% is a climate policy problem, but a geopolitical security solution. And in a world which prioritizes security, it's very difficult to convince governments to get rid of it. And we already observe, half a year later, a surging use of coal and a surging production of domestic coal in the major economies around the world. Another important negative aspect of a deglobalizing situation is that clean energy is actually a winner from globalization. The most transformative, most disruptive clean energy technology is solar PV. The success of solar PV is the success of outsourcing to China. That's what it is. Even in the case of wind, a modern wind turbine has components on average from 32 different countries. So in a world which is inward-looking, which does not trust international trade, where everybody wants to manufacture their own electric car batteries, there the scale-up of clean energy is more difficult than it should be. However, it is not all doom and gloom. We also looked at the various regional responses around the world, and we also see chances of those disjuncted responses adding together to an overall accelerated energy transition. And we created 4 templates, 4 clusters, based on 2 criteria. One, what is the social and political willingness to pay a price in the short term? So how much economic resiliency the society has. And the second is what is the physical resiliency of the energy system to natural hazards and energy security shocks. And Europe, of course, is the eye of the storm. In Europe, we observe a very high social and political willingness to pay. Very strongly, European governments doubled down on both renewable energy and energy efficiency. Society was shocked out of its comfort zone. If you go to Europe these days, just go to a restaurant, talk to the waiters or the hairdresser of my wife. Everybody is talking about insulation, heat pumps, biomass boilers, solar panels on the rooftop, because society is now really scared by the energy crisis. And there's a very open discourse in Europe of changing lifestyle. Don't drive your car, turn down the heating, ride your bicycle. Now, at the same time, of course, resiliency in Europe is weaker because Europe spent decades building up the bilateral energy relationship with Russia, and now the war is breaking it. Now, jumping through the Atlantic to the United States, I spent last week in Houston, and I have to say that in the city of Houston, I failed to notice indications of people voluntarily changing their lifestyle to reduce their energy consumption. And very clearly, the United States is embarking on decarbonizing a high energy consumption lifestyle. It is possible to do that with innovation and with investment. Now, the good news is the United States has an innovation potential which is unmatched in the world economy, and also the new American climate legislation is expected to unleash a gold rush of investment into the clean energy system. So it is a highly innovation and investment-driven pathway, which nevertheless will have a high energy consumption. Jumping forward through the Pacific, China is, of course, a cluster of its own. We call it the Great Wall of Change. China has 2 very important cards to play. That's industrial policy and infrastructure development. In industrial policy, China did not invent the solar panel, and China did not invent the lithium-ion battery. For both critical technologies, the fundamental scientific breakthroughs took place in the United States. The first pilot factories were in Japan, and China ended up with 75% of the total global supply chain of both of them through its very effective industrial policy. And also for infrastructure development, China is a category of its own. Perhaps a good comparison is that some of you might be familiar with the adventures of the state of California in developing a high-speed train from Los Angeles to San Francisco, which have been ongoing for 25 years. In the past decade, the average speed of expansion of the Chinese high-speed rail system was a Los Angeles-San Francisco project on average every quarter. So it's a very effective infrastructure development that is ongoing over there. And last but not least, we see the major emerging economies, and we call them the surfers because they are surfing the opportunity. These are countries which are proactively looking for leapfrogging opportunities. For example, LED lights in India is a fantastic leapfrogging success story. But at the same time, there is also a very strong awareness by the governments of the development need and the need to build up the modern energy infrastructure. And the importance of this infrastructure development is very often underappreciated. If you take the number of people who leave their villages and move to Cairo, move to Mumbai, move to Jakarta, all around the world, then urbanization currently is running at the speed of Los Angeles every month. So every month, a Los Angeles-sized city is growing out of the ground, which requires steel, aluminum, plastics, glass, concrete, all the energy-intensive commodities of the global economy. In advanced market economies, we have seen a flattening of demand for these commodities as the modern infrastructure was built. China is an outlier. China has an unusually big construction sector, and now that the Chinese economy is rebalancing for a more service sector, more high-tech driven economic model, and the construction sector's importance is shrinking, that will have important energy implications. But in both India and Africa, construction activity, steel demand, cement demand is growing exactly as it should in the current stage of the development. And in the case of electric appliances, we actually see a more rapid penetration of electric appliances in the key emerging economies than what we observed in the main Western countries. People buy refrigerators, people buy washing machines, and they should. When you look at the global data on comparing human development with per capita energy consumption, the correlation breaks down at around 100 gigajoules per year. Because above 100 gigajoules per year, we are talking about energy consumption forms like buying South African strawberries in the middle of January, which are transported by air cargo. In those societies, there is a legitimate role to discuss lifestyle change. But below 100 gigajoules per year, there's a brutal one-to-one correlation between the human development of a society and the per capita energy consumption, because this is the stage when 10-year-old girls can finally go to school because there is a piped water instead of walking and fetching water by hand. So this modernization will shape energy consumption patterns. Now, to a large extent, climate change is an investment problem. Energy is the most capital-intensive industry of the global economy. But we see different processes unfolding in the two sides of the coin. In the past 5 years, oil and gas investment was cut down by half. It was a quite painful process in the industry. And especially in the case of natural gas, the analytical model suggests, this is the work of the International Energy Agency, that the remaining investment, especially in the case of natural gas, is already cut down to the level than what is the residual demand need of a world economy going on rapid decarbonization. So that part of the equation has already been done. But at the same time, the clean energy investment, which is indeed able to keep that oil and gas demand in that declining trajectory, is around 2.5 to 3 times bigger than what we observe in real life. So if you take some of the big clean energy stories, if you take the largest wind turbine manufacturer in the global economy, which is General Electric and Vestas, neck to neck, they switch position quarter to quarter. If you buy every single wind turbine from the largest wind turbine manufacturer of the global economy and you deploy it, you reduce gas use in electricity generation by around 10 billion cubic meters. Global gas demand is 4,000 billion cubic meters, and before the crisis, it was growing at 100 per year. So, and you see these kind of discrepancies in energy efficiency investment, in transport electrification, and in many other fields. So there is a roughly $2,000 billion per year investment gap, which is the underinvestment in the world economy in clean energy. And this is the #1 investment problem in the global economy. So how do we move forward from this? One is the unique importance of electrification. So electrification is not one solution among the many. It is really the by far the most important core solution. And a credible transition strategy has to start from basically electrifying everything which can be reasonably electrified. So electrification has been increasing, but ambitious transition trajectories have a step change in the speed of electrification. And this is not only electric cars. So currently, the share of electricity in global final energy consumption is a bit less than 20%. 80% is oil used in vehicles, gas used in gas boilers, coal used in factories and steel mills. If you wave a magic wand and replace every single passenger car to an electric car, the share of electricity mathematically would go from 20% to 24%. So to go up to 50, you have a much deeper electrification, electrifying heat, electrifying industrial processes, even electrifying heavier vehicles. Now, where this electricity would come from, there I would show you, three recently published scenarios. One, the International Energy Agency's net zero roadmap, which emerged as a benchmark for assessing the speed of the transition. The middle one is the International Renewable Energy Agency's 1.5 pathway, which is a UN body with an explicit political mandate to promote renewables. And the third one is the Shell Sky scenario, the evil oil lobby, who is supposed to sabotage renewable energy. And what you can see here is that there is a remarkable consensus among the 5 different organizations about the unique future role of wind and solar. These 3 scenarios are more or less identical within the margin of modeling error. So we are embarking on a journey to push wind and solar into the power system at a much, much higher speed. That there is a very promising innovation in digital solutions providing flexibility to the power grid, but it's also very clear that dispatchable generation remains essential, especially for managing the longer-term fluctuations in the power system. Let it be a longer period of low-pressure systems with several weeks of low wind, which can happen in the North Sea, or, for example, droughts in Brazil. Now, as of today, in the current stage of the transition, this is the job of gas turbines. This is the big fuel role of gas. In the later stages of the transition, that will have to be low-carbon dispatchable generation, either running on hydrogen, or there is also a very promising innovation in advanced nuclear technologies, which can step in for this role. Now, there's also a very interesting question that why we go with electrification with only to 50%. Of course, getting to 50% is easier said than done. But why not 100% electrified energy system? Well, this picture was made in the backyard of a Shell station in the Netherlands, where we put down 4 fast chargers, which overloaded the distribution network. The network operator told us to join the queue and wait for 5 years, because they cannot build up the network fast enough. So we ended up building a stationary battery facility which charges during off-peak hours and dispatches the electricity to the electric cars in peak periods. And we are encountering this type of problems at a 10% electric car penetration without even electric trucks. So the infrastructure, the technology, the energy security implications of highly electrified energy systems are not trivial and have to be managed carefully. We definitely see a role both for hydrogen and also for bioenergy complementing electrification. And for a conclusion, I would also touch upon a technology which is not fashionable, and you are not supposed to mention it in polite society. But we actually have a very large facility successfully running here in Alberta, and this is carbon capture and storage. So why do we believe that carbon capture and storage is essential? Well, the first thing to reflect on is that if you imagine a state of the world where from tomorrow morning, every single new capital equipment is perfectly zero carbon. So every new truck runs on hydrogen, every new ship runs on methanol, every new steel plant runs on green hydrogen, but we simply operate the existing equipment and the existing capital stock until its normal depreciation. That's 1.6 degrees warming. So the existing capital stock already overshoots the carbon budget, and technologies will have to be deployed, especially in the heavy industry, on existing facilities to reduce those emissions. I would also add that in some parts of the world, it is actually not politically plausible to shut down fossil fuel production. There are very important countries where the governments will just say, no, I'm not going to do that. So a frequent criticism about carbon capture and storage, that is just extends the life of fossil fuels. That's true, and precisely that is its advantage. Because given that there is no politically feasible pathway to shut down all the global fossil fuel production, you will have to extend the life of those facilities in a zero carbon fashion. And last but not least, we also have to be prepared for the eventuality that there's a growing likelihood that the carbon dioxide concentration will overshoot, and carbon will have to be removed from the air. There's a very promising technological innovation, and Shell is very much involved in direct air capture technology, where you can suck carbon dioxide out from the air. This is the equivalent of, I would say, a difficult surgery, which doctors don't like, but might have to do. And this is part of the technology skill set, and we are not in a position to discard it. So this is how we see the energy journey, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you.